how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of the Usagi Podjimbo podcast. I'm your host, Mike, as always. And today we got a good one for you. We got two stories for you. We start out with Kitsune, which is our first story. Then we move into the next story, which is a very short story, which is Gaki. I believe it's what it's called. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's Gaki or Gaki. I don't remember what it's called. But this is a podcast all about Usagi Yojimbo and me going through the stories and talking about them and giving you my thoughts and feelings about each particular story. If you're new to the podcast, thanks for listening. If you're an old listener, thanks for coming back and listening to some more Usagi Podjimbo. So I gotta say, I picked up a bunch of new listeners recently. It feels really cool to meet everybody and whatnot and talk and about Usagi Yojimbo and stuff like that. You know, one of the best comic books of all time, you gotta say, you know. But if you want to help out the podcast, tell your friends, tell your family, rate and review the podcast. You can do whatever on whatever podcast platform you choose to do it on. But let's get into this particular issue we got going on today, which is Kitsune. Not Kitsune. It's Kitsune. Yeah, it's Kitsune. I wanted to say Katsuiji for some reason, but it's Kitsune. Kitsune or Kitsune. What you would call the character. The story starts out with somebody balancing a top on a fan. They're like, I call this strolling on the dragon's back. And we see this young fox woman. She is saying, thank you for my performance. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We see Usagi watching in the background. We see a bunch of people enjoying this particular what do you call it? Street performance, I guess you could say it is. And they start donating money to give to this woman. Usagi is very much enthralled and he's like, oh, this is so cool. I really enjoyed your show. And he gives this woman some money. And she says, thank you, Samurai, for your generosity, and he asks, where did you acquire such skills? And she's like, oh, when a girl lives by her wits as I do, she has to learn what she can, get with her wits and whatnot. So she had to learn how to use her top, or they called it a kegagawana. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's called the top. I probably mispronounced that terribly. And they start talking about the different kinds of tops that they have, which are fighting tops, that are made out of metal and stuff. And Usagi's like, oh yeah, I played with some of those. Yeah, those are really cool. And they see each other off. And Kitsune says bye to Usagi. And she sighs as she watches him leave. And she's like, oh, that guy was really nice. It sucks that I had to pick his pocket, is basically what she says. And she goes off about her day, and she goes off. So I guess the next sucker who shows her some interests, and we see Usagi later on. He's at a restaurant or an inn, and he goes to pay, and he doesn't have his purse with him. He doesn't have it, and so what does Usagi have to do? He has to go wash some dishes. Poor Usagi has to go wash some dishes. Oh my god, so sad. But it's funny to see him go wash dishes, oh, you don't got no food, go wash the dishes. And there's all these dishes piled up in this one little panel. I love it. It's funny. Elsewhere, we see a familiar face. If you've read the Kite story, this one particular character, Hatsu, I believe his name is. Yeah, his name's Hatsu, if I remember correctly. He's gambling. He's winning a bunch of money. Aside from making everybody mad because he's winning all their money and whatnot, the gambler who he's winning against, gets mad at him. He's like, "Oh, I know you're cheating. You're cheating." He's like, "How can I cheat?" Hatsu says, "How can I cheat you out of all this money? Of you?" And the guy starts to get into Hatsu's face. He's like, "Oh, have you met my bodyguard?" And we see this bodyguard. He's a very stoic bodyguard, I would say. But they walk out, and the guy who owns the gambling establishment tells these ruffians to go rough up Hatsu and his bodyguard. So they go into charge, and they actually kill Hatsu's bodyguard, and Hatsu is running for his life. And he's like, "Oh my god, I got to get out of here. What do we got to do?" He starts banging on this door, while Usagi happens to be finishing up his paying off his debt from washing all the dishes. He hears this crash. You hear "help, help" in the distance, and Usagi's like, "What's going on?" He has his sword in hand, and the Hatsu is like, "Oh, help me, samurai! Please help me!" And the guys who are going after Hatsu are like, "This is none of your concern. What? Blah blah blah. Let's give us Hatsu. We'll be on our merry ways." Basically, is what they say. Usagi tells them to take their quarrel outside and call the authorities. And they're like, what are you going to do to us, dishwasher? We're going to get you. And this is pretty funny where Usagi is like, just takes them all out. He just takes them all out right in the restaurant. And he like beats them. And they all run away. And you see the shopkeeper's like, "Oh, my shop is ruined." And Hatsu's like, "Oh, you saved me, samurai. Thank you." And he's like, "Oh my god." Hatsu recognizes who Usagi is. He's the guy who basically ran him out of the kite festival. And we see Usagi issue 20. And we see Hatsu, and Usagi's like, "Do I know you?" And Hatsu's like, "No, no, no, no. You do not know me, but hey, maybe we can strike up like like maybe I can hire you to be like a bodyguard or something. I'll pay for all the damages." He tells the shopkeeper he'll pay for all the damages if he keeps quiet, just lets them go, and he gives the shopkeeper all his money. And we see Usagi and Hatsu walk off. Hatsu uh, hires Usagi to basically be his bodyguard, which is really funny to think about, even though Usagi doesn't know who Hatsu is. Usagi, he knows he knows he's seen this guy before, but he's seen so many faces before, he doesn't know what's going on. And we see Kitsune. She's performing her top trick. She's doing one called uh, height scaling the heights to heaven, which he's balancing atop on like the blade of a sword. And Usagi's like, "Oh, Kitsune, you're working late, and we see Hatsu. He's like, going, I guess gotta steer clear of Ichibane's men. They're nearby, and he doesn't want to get in trouble or killed. And we see Kitsune and Usagi talking, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I was hoping to entertain some people with late night crowds in the theater, but tonight is terrible." And we see the gamblers' men, Ichibane's men. They're like, "Oh, there's the dishwasher with Hatsu. Let's get him." And they go to attack Usagi and Hatsu, and unfortunately, Kitsune is in the way as well. But Kitsune actually throws a top at one of the mercenaries, which is pretty funny, knocking him clean out. And Usagi takes on these men. One of them happens to get a hold of Hatsu, and he's like, "Oh God, save me!" Hatsu says, as this guy is coming down with him with a blade to him, and he's like, I'll be good. I'll be good. Just don't kill me. God save me, basically." And who saves him? Who happens to save him is Kitsune, and she asks, are you okay?" And he's like, "I think I'm okay." He's like, "Good, keep out of the way." And Usagi actually fights off all these men, which is really funny. He actually scares them all away. He scares all of Ichibane's men he scares them away, and he finally realizes, "Hey, I know this guy. You're Hatsu. You're the guy who tried to swindle everybody out of money," and he chases him out of town. And we see Kitsune performing like another top trick, which is called leaping over the mountains, which he takes the blade of a sword and like bounces the top over, which is pretty cool to see. And we see Usagi and Kitsune talking, and she thanks Usagi. She wonders if he ever caught the gambler, but no, he never caught the gambler. But someday maybe he will and find him, and he'll have to explain, himself for what he's done with his life and whatnot. And our story ends with Kitsune and Usagi leaving. Usagi has made a new friend, I think. And we see Kitsune up to her old tricks. He's like, "Oh, he's such a nice guy, and I almost regret taking his." And he's like, "Oh, it's gone." Kitsune says, "Usagi stole back the stuff that Kitsune stole from him," and she happens to say, "Oh well, I still have the money I lifted from the gambler last night, so all ends well. It ends well." But after all, a girl's got to do what a girl's got to do, and that's where this particular issue ends. We'll talk about this issue for a little minute before we get to the next one. This issue is a lot of fun. I like Kitsune as a character. She shows up from time to time within the Usagi Yojimbo story as a really nice like foil. She's not a bad guy per se, but she's not like necessarily a good person. She's like very much in a gray area. She goes after herself and whatnot. It's fun to see the callbacks between the kite story with Hatsu. I never thought we would see Hatsu again after I read this story the first time. I was like, "Oh, Hatsu's back so soon." It's funny to see like the juxtaposition from him and like how he acted in the last story we saw him in versus now where he's like a sniveling coward and whatnot. But this one is a really good, strong issue and a good, strong introduction for Kitsune as a character. She's a pretty beloved character, if I remember correctly, in the Usagi world, and she definitely has an impact from what I remember in other stories and whatnot. But this is a fun story. It's a little lighthearted, almost like little slapstick humor here and there occasionally, which I enjoyed. But yeah, it's definitely a fun story. But we move on to Gaki, which is a story about Usagi and Kitsune when Usagi was younger. We will talk about that next, and we'll see how that goes. So we start out this short story with Katsuichi and Usagi. Katsuichi is telling him about the road of the true Bushido code, the samurai code, is a long and rocky path, and Usagi has a lot to learn to build his samurai character. But Usagi doesn't really want to talk about philosophy as young Usagi. He wants to learn about martial arts. And Katsuichi's like, "Oh, you must learn the basics of combat before you practice it, Grasshopper." And they're walking along, and you see Katsuichi. He's like, "So, you're anxious to be taught the skills of war, are you, Water Beetle?" And he's like, "Well, very well. Look at those clouds right there." And he gets hit on the head. Usagi does. He's like, "Lesson 1: a warrior never is taken unaware." And he starts going off about the Bushido code and walks along. And he's like, "Look, this is a good place for us to camp tonight. Go collect me some firewood." Usagi goes to collect firewood, and he starts talking to himself. "Sensei just tapped me on the head, but it's very embarrassing." He says, "I can't wait until I'm better. I'll show him. I can't." He goes like, "I guess this is enough firewood." He goes to gather firewood and whatnot, and we see Usagi walking by. He's like, "Sensei, sleeping better. Be quiet." And he's like, "Ha ha, I got this. I got an idea. Usagi says. Usagi's like, "I'll teach him a lesson. I'll teach number one lesson. I'm just gonna give him a tap." And Usagi has this like look on his face, not like a menacing look, but haha, I'll get you. And he goes and he hits who he thinks is Katsuichi over the head. He's like, "Oh, I've done it now." And you hear like the squish as Usagi hits him, a splat. He hits Katsuichi over the head. He's like, "Oh, his brains are coming out or oozing out." Usagi falls back because he fainted. And he's like, "I'd better see how badly I hurt Katsuichi. Maybe he's just stunned." And Usagi takes off the hat that Katsuichi was wearing. He's like, "You killed me, potato bug." And he has this like Katsuichi has this look on his face, like, "I'm gonna get you." And he's like, "Ah!" Usagi runs away, and he's like, "Oh, he's become a Gekkai, a hungry ghost." And we see Katsuichi as a ghost chasing down Usagi, which is a very funny sight to see, I have to say. As Usagi is being chased down, Katsuichi says, "Let me give you another lesson." Usagi makes it to a cliff. Katsuichi's ghost is going after him. He's like, ah, and he falls off the cliff, and like Katsuichi turns like this big fiery ghost thing. He's like, come, student, into the fire. Ha ha ha. Usagi falls down and wakes up. He's like, oh, I must have had a nightmare. And you see Usagi, the fire, huh? The fire. And you see Usagi freak out. His eyes like bug out like Looney Tunes, basically. He's like, no, it's true. I killed you, Gaki. Gaki. He's like, what? And Katsuichi's like, what are you talking about? What about the fire? Uh, and Usagi like falls back. He has like little crosses over his eyes, and which is really funny to see, I have to say. As Usagi is passed out from all the excitement, Katsuichi's like, what's going on here? I just asked him to make a fire while I bathe in the stream. He's like, hey, why is our pumpkin squished? It was supposed to be for supper. And we see all of Katsuichi's things left on a rock that was made to look like Katsuichi, or Usagi thought it was Katsuichi. And that's where this short little fun story ends. It's a fun little series issue. We don't get a lot of well, we do later on, but like in this first volume, we don't get a lot of like young Usagi stories, which these are fun to read. I like them. They're fun. They break up they break up like the flow of each story whenever we get to read a young Usagi story, because they're fun, short, and they did a little insight to like what Usagi was like when he was younger. Because I think the last time we saw him was in Samurai when he was younger, when he met Katsuichi for the first time, which was fun. But this is fun little Usagi's overactive imagination when he's a child, and it just makes me laugh so much to see like the different aspects of Usagi, from like the Kitsune story and this one, like the different aspects of like how Usagi can just be like really funny sometimes, and like he doesn't necessarily take himself too seriously, it seems like, but this is a fun breath of fresh air, and we're going to move on to the next issue later. I wasn't for sure whether or not to take these two issues and these two stories and break them up into two different podcasts, but I decided to just put them into one particular podcast. I love these two stories. They're fun. And there's going to be more to come when Kitsune shows up again later on throughout the Usagi series. We do get more of her character growth and stuff like that. She's a pretty cool character, I have to say. But yeah, thanks for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed this particular episode. Let me know. Give me some feedback. You can find me at Usagi Podjimbo, a Usagi Yojimbo podcast on Facebook, on all major podcast platforms. Rate and review the podcast. Tell your friends. Hope you guys enjoyed this particular issue, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode. Stay safe, peace out, and go read some Usagi Yojimbo.